The Chicago morning sat under a quiet weight of snow. Inside the marble lobby of Hartwell Meridian Group, every surface gleamed under high white light. The floor had been polished overnight. The reception desk was lined with fresh white lilies. A long row of digital screens cycled the company logo in slow, confident strokes. Staff in tailored uniforms moved in practiced quiet, the way people move when they have been told that everything must be perfect. This was not an ordinary morning. This was the day Vanessa Hartwell would close the largest deal of her short career as chief executive. She walked in through the revolving glass doors at 8:52, 12 minutes earlier than the schedule required. Her black dress fit close at the waist. Her heels struck the marble in a clean, even rhythm. Her chestnut hair fell straight past her shoulders, untouched by the cold outside. Behind her followed her assistant, two attorneys, the chief financial officer, and a small cluster of investor relations managers. Each of them carried a folder, a tablet, or a stack of presentation cards. None of them spoke unless she spoke first. The deal of the day was Whitmore Haven, a chain of low-income housing for the elderly, for widows, and for retired workers. On paper, Whitmore Haven was an aging property with poor margins sitting on land that had quietly tripled in value. On Vanessa's slide deck, it was an opportunity. The plan was simple. Acquire the chain. Restructure the residences. Convert the buildings into luxury condominiums, private care suites, and ground floor retail. The presentation called the strategy urban renewal. It did not use the word displacement. Vanessa believed she was being practical. She had not built the original company, but she intended to be the one who multiplied it. She was 28 years old, and she had heard the whispers since the day her father had handed her the title. Lucky daughter. Soft hands. Too young. She intended to silence those voices with one closing. At 9:09, a man stepped through the revolving door who did not belong to her morning at all. He was old. 74, although no one in the lobby would have guessed within 5 years either way. His coat was brown wool, frayed at the cuffs, and a small patch on the elbow had been sewn shut by a careful, patient hand. His shoes were leather, scuffed, soaked along the seams from the slush outside. He leaned lightly on a wooden cane. In his other hand he carried a paper envelope, yellowed along the edges, the corners soft from being held too often. He approached the reception desk with the slow deliberation of a man who had thought about this walk for many nights. He gave his name quietly. He said he needed to speak with the chief executive before the meeting began. The young receptionist asked whether he had an appointment. He answered that he had written 3 letters and received no reply, and that the documents inside his envelope concerned Whitmore Haven directly. The receptionist hesitated. The name Whitmore made her pause. Her eyes flicked toward the glass conference room, where the executive team was already gathering, but she did not have the authority to interrupt them. A security guard stepped over and asked the old man to wait beside the wall. A guest in a tailored coat glanced at his soaked shoes and turned his face away. 2 attorneys in the investor party gave him the brief, professional smile that powerful people give to inconvenience. Vanessa noticed him from across the lobby. She did not see an envelope. She did not see a man who had written 3 letters. She saw a stained coat against polished marble on the most important morning of her career. She crossed the lobby with the same even, measured steps. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. When she was within speaking distance, she allowed herself a small, amused smile, the kind that signaled to her audience that she had everything under control. "Sir," she said, "I think you have the wrong building." The old man kept his eyes steady. "I do not. This is a private session," she said. "It is invitation only." "I have written 3 times," he said. "I have come to ask you to listen for 10 minutes before you sign." She let her gaze drift down to his coat, to the soaked seams of his shoes, and to the envelope in his hand. Her smile thinned. "Sir," she said, "this is a financial headquarters. It is not a place that hands out charity." A few of the investors laughed, quietly, The way people laugh when they are unsure whether laughter is appropriate but want to be on the powerful side of the room. A young assistant near the reception desk lowered her eyes. An older accountant in the back looked at the floor. The old man, whose name was George Whitmore, took a careful breath. He did not raise his voice. "I am not here for charity. I am here because the deal you are about to sign violates a clause my father wrote into the founding documents of the buildings you are buying." Vanessa did not seem to hear the sentence. She had already turned to the security guard at her side. "Please escort him outside," she said, "before any of our partners have to see this." The guard moved forward and laid a hand under the old man's arm. George swayed. The envelope nearly slipped from his fingers. He did not resist. He only said, very quietly, "Please listen before you sign." Vanessa allowed herself one last sentence, and she allowed it to be loud enough to carry. "I do not have to listen," she said, "to a man who does not even know how to dress for the room." The room did not gasp. It only became colder. Near a tall column in the corner of the lobby, almost out of view of the executive party, a man in a maintenance uniform straightened up from an open electrical panel. His name was Patrick Carter. He was 29 years old. He worked for the building's facilities team. He set down a screwdriver on top of his open toolbox and quietly closed the panel cover. He had been listening for longer than anyone in the room had noticed. Patrick was tall and broad-shouldered, with the steady, careful build of a man who used his body every day for honest work. His brown hair was cut short. His jaw was firm. His eyes were a calm gray-blue. The cuffs of his blue-gray uniform were worn at the edges, and the knees of his work pants carried the soft fade of long use. He did not look out of place in the building. He looked like one of the people who quietly held the building together. A few steps behind him, on a low waiting bench beside the reception alcove, a small girl sat with a worn stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. Her name was Zoe Carter. She was 6 years old. Her brown hair was tied off center, the way a tired father ties hair in a hurry before work. Her coat was pale blue. The rabbit's ears were soft from too much loving. Her school had let out early because of the snow. Patrick could not afford a sitter on short notice. He had asked his supervisor whether his daughter could sit on the lobby bench until his shift ended. The supervisor had said yes, as long as she stayed quiet. Zoe was always quiet. She knew how to wait while her father worked. She knew not to bother people in suits. She knew how to fold her hands around her rabbit and watch the world go by. But this morning she had been watching the old man. She had watched him walk slowly across the lobby. She had watched the security guard step toward him. She had watched the woman in the black dress smile, and then say something that made the old man's shoulders fall. Zoe slid off the bench. She walked to her father and tugged the side of his uniform. "Daddy," she said softly, "what did he do wrong?" Patrick did not answer right away. He crouched, set one knee against the marble and looked at his daughter's face for a long second. Then he looked across the lobby at the old man, at the envelope, at the woman in the black dress, at the small crowd of well-dressed people who had decided that none of this was their problem. He thought about his late wife. He thought about the months after she died, when he had walked into a bank to ask for an extension on the hospital bills, and he had been looked at the way the old man was being looked at now. He thought about Zoe learning, by watching him, what a grown man does when someone smaller than him is being pushed out a door. He stood up. He did not hurry. He wiped his hands on a cloth from his back pocket. He set the cloth on his toolbox. He told Zoe, gently, to sit back on the bench. Then he crossed the lobby. Vanessa Hartwell saw him coming from 20 feet away. She did not look alarmed. She looked, at first, only slightly puzzled. A maintenance worker walking toward an executive group during a closing did not happen often. The look she gave him was the look she gave any small interruption. Patrick stopped at a respectful distance from the security guard. He did not raise his hands. He did not raise his voice. He spoke clearly enough that the people standing around them could hear. "Do not pull him," he said. "If he says he has documents about the deal, the legal team should look at them first." There was a brief, total silence. Vanessa let her eyes travel down to the small embroidered name patch on his chest. Patrick Carter, she read aloud, slowly. Maintenance, basement level. She allowed herself a short laugh. And you believe you should be inserting yourself into a board-level closing? I believe he should be heard, Patrick answered. You believe a great many things then, she said. I suggest you go back to your wires and your light bulbs. The matters in this lobby are well above your pay grade. She had used pay grade the way other people used a closed door. She expected him to lower his head, mutter something about his job, and walk away. He did not move. Vanessa's smile thinned the way a sheet of ice thins before it cracks. She turned her chin slightly, just enough to see the small girl on the bench. The child had pulled her rabbit tight to her chest. Her eyes were wide. She had heard everything. Vanessa's voice dropped. It dropped not into kindness, but into something colder and more precise. You have a little girl sitting right there, Mr. Carter, she said. Are you certain you want to lose your job over a stranger in an old coat? The lobby had gone very still. The investors had stopped pretending not to look. The receptionist had stopped pretending to type. The attorney at Vanessa's elbow studied his shoes. Patrick glanced once, briefly, at Zoe. His daughter was clutching the rabbit so tightly her small knuckles had gone pale. She was not crying. She was watching. He looked back at Vanessa Hartwell. I am thinking about her, he said. That is exactly why I cannot stand here and do nothing. There was no flourish in his voice. There was no anger. He had simply told her the truth. Vanessa felt the answer land in the room. She did not let it show. She turned slightly toward her human resources director, a woman in a gray suit who had drifted in from a side corridor. Note this, she said. Mr. Carter and I will be speaking with your office after the closing. Then she turned back to the security guard. Take the old man outside. The guard tightened his hand. George swayed. Patrick did not step back. Around the lobby, the staff who had been pretending not to watch were now openly watching. They were watching because they had seen something they had not expected to see. A man in a maintenance uniform was standing between an old stranger and the most powerful person in the building, and he was not blinking. Vanessa Hartwell, who had built her morning on the assumption that everyone in this lobby would yield to her, found herself in the rarest situation of her professional life. Someone with nothing to gain was refusing to back down. She decided to take back the room with humiliation. She turned to the investor group with a tight, apologetic smile. I am very sorry, she said. Sometimes people who do not understand procedure assume kindness can replace contracts. A few investors gave the small, uncomfortable laugh that people give when they hope a difficult moment will pass. Then she turned to Patrick. You change light bulbs, she said. You repair pipes. You unlock the boiler room when one of my engineers cannot find his keys. Please do not stand here pretending you understand assets, legal exposure, or investment strategy. She turned to George. And you, sir. If you truly had anything important, you would not have walked into my building in that coat. George looked down at his sleeve, almost out of habit. The coat had been mended at the elbow by his wife, in the last year of her life. He did not say that. He only said quietly, I wrote 3 letters. Every week, Vanessa said, my office receives hundreds of letters from people who feel the world has been unjust to them. Not every letter deserves an answer. The line landed harder than she had intended. A few of the older men in the investor group, men who had built their fortunes slowly and remembered being unanswered themselves, frowned for the first time. George tightened his grip on the envelope. Whitmore Haven, he said, is not only a real estate asset. It is a promise. It was created by a covenant. A promise does not pay property tax, Mr. Whitmore, Vanessa replied. It was the use of the name that caused Patrick to lift his chin. He had heard the name before. Not in the lobby, not in a meeting, not in any executive briefing. He had heard it in the building's basement, deep in the 3rd sublevel. During a maintenance call he had answered alone almost a year earlier. The damp-proofing system in the old archive room had failed. While the pump cleared the floor, Patrick had waited beside a wall of metal shelves. On a brass plate, dulled by dust, he had read words he had not understood at the time. Whitmore Haven Covenant. Worker Housing Protection Trust. He had not been told what the words meant. He had only remembered them because they had not looked like the other plaques in the room. They had not been corporate. They had been written like a promise. Now he looked at the envelope in the old man's hand. Across its front, in faded ink, were 3 words. Original Covenant File. Patrick understood, in a single quiet second, that the man Vanessa Hartwell had called too poor to enter her building was the only person in the building who could stop her closing. Vanessa turned to the security guard. Her voice took on the clean, hard tone of a courtroom command. "Remove him," she said, "and remove Mr. Carter from the event area." The guard moved forward. Zoe on the bench made a small sound. She thought, in that instant, that her father was about to be carried away with the old man. Patrick raised one hand toward her, just slightly. A gentle signal. "Stay there. I'm all right." Then he looked at Vanessa Hartwell. He did not raise his voice. He did not lecture her. He gave her 3 quiet words. "Check his name." Vanessa's brow tightened. "Excuse me." He did not repeat himself the same way. He said it slower. "Check his name." The lobby fell into the kind of silence that does not happen in office buildings. It was the silence of a room that has just realized something important is happening, and that none of the people who built the morning had prepared for it. The investors looked at each other. The lead attorney standing behind Vanessa lifted his eyes from his phone for the first time in several minutes. Vanessa laughed once, sharp and dry, to cover the chill at the back of her neck. "You believe an old surname will stop a $100 million transaction?" Patrick answered without heat. "I believe that before you sell Whitmore Haven, you should know who Whitmore is." The lead attorney took a single step forward. Among lawyers who handle older real estate, a surname attached to a covenant is the kind of warning that can end careers. He cleared his throat softly. He said, "Madam, perhaps we should verify." Vanessa heard the shift in his voice. Her smile remained. Her stomach did not. She turned to her assistant. "Pull it up," she said, "so we can finish this charade." The assistant tapped at her tablet. At first she searched the morning's guest registry. The name was not there. Vanessa's expression flickered with a brief sense of relief. Then Patrick spoke again, quietly. "Not the guest list," he said. "The original founding records of Whitmore Haven. The covenant file." The assistant looked up at him, startled that a maintenance supervisor knew the phrase. She changed her search. The lead attorney moved to her shoulder. Together they read. George Whitmore did not look triumphant. He did not look angry. He only looked tired. The way a man looks when something he has carried alone for a long time is finally being seen by other people. Zoe on the bench wiped at her eyes with the back of her wrist. She did not understand what check his name meant. She only understood that her father had just spoken 3 small words, and the room had stopped. For the first time since walking into the lobby, Vanessa Hartwell took half a step backward. The lead attorney's expression changed in a manner that did not require translation. He read a passage to himself, then read it again. Then he turned his tablet so that the senior investor could see the screen. The investor's mouth tightened. The clause they were reading was 41 years old. It had been written by George Whitmore Sr., the father of the old man in the brown coat. When the founding parcels of Whitmore Haven were dedicated, the elder Whitmore had insisted on a single, binding condition. The buildings could be sold. The buildings could be renovated. The buildings could be modernized. The buildings could not be converted in any manner that displaced the original beneficiary class. That class had been defined plainly in the founding paragraph. Low-income, elderly residents. Widows. Retired workers without sufficient pension. The clause contained a final sentence, which the lead attorney now read aloud. In the event that any acquiring party attempts a use change that violates the original beneficiary protection, the representative heir of the Whitmore family shall have standing to petition for an immediate freeze of the transaction, pending independent trustee review. He set the tablet down on the reception counter very carefully, the way a man sets down a glass that might shatter. He turned to Vanessa Hartwell. "This file is genuine, madam," he said. "And the gentleman holding the original is the named heir." Vanessa's jaw did not move. The smile she had worn through the lobby slowly slid off her face the way frost slides from a window when a room warms up. "Why," she said, very quietly, "have I never seen this before?" The attorney did not answer immediately. He did not want to. But the senior investor was now watching him too closely for evasion. He said the truth. "The clause was logged in our acquired properties archive as low residual risk, madam. We were told the original document could not be located." He looked at the envelope in George Whitmore's hand. The corners were soft. The seal was old wax. The signatures at the bottom of the page inside were faded, but legible. "It was not lost," the attorney said. "It was simply with the family." George did not raise his voice. He had not raised it once. He opened the envelope and slid out the original covenant. He set it gently on the reception counter, beside copies of 3 letters he had written and 3 response envelopes that had never come back. He set down a roster of current Whitmore Haven residents, sorted by age, the oldest first. He set down a notice of intent to displace that had been filed by Hartwell Meridian Group's planning office, which named the same residents. He looked up at Vanessa Hartwell. "You did not need to know whether I was rich or poor," he said. "You only needed to know that I am the last person still keeping a promise my father wrote down." The senior investor, a man in his 60s who had spent a long career building his name, took a slow breath. He turned to the lead attorney. "Pause the signing," he said. The attorney nodded. The investor turned to Vanessa Hartwell with the patient, almost gentle disappointment of an older man who has watched many ambitious young executives ruin themselves in a single morning. "Madam," he said, "I will not put my name on a closing that begins with a public scene like this. We will reconvene when the legal exposure has been honestly reviewed." Vanessa tried once to recover the morning. She offered to bring Mr. Whitmore into a private boardroom. She offered an apology, in the careful, half-shaped language of a person who is not yet sure she has done anything wrong, only that she has been caught. George did not raise his voice. He simply said, "You wanted to speak with me privately after you learned I had power. When you believed I was only a poor old man, you wanted to drag me out of the door." That single sentence carried farther than her entire morning had carried. The investor group did not stay. Within 20 minutes, the lobby that had been arranged for a closing ceremony was being quietly disassembled. The lilies were carried out. The screens were turned off. The investors filed past Vanessa Hartwell without meeting her eyes. The reporter who had come to cover the deal stayed long enough to confirm a single sentence with the lead attorney, and then left to file his story. Patrick stepped back from the center of the lobby. He had not asked for attention, and he did not want it now. He walked to the bench. He picked up Zoe. He carried her, with her rabbit, back toward the column where his toolbox still stood open. He did not strut. He did not look at Vanessa Hartwell. He simply went back to the work he had been hired to do. Zoe leaned close to his ear. "Daddy," she whispered. "Was he really important?" Patrick adjusted the way he held her, so she could see the people quietly moving past. He thought about how to give her an honest answer. "He was important," he said, before anyone in this room knew his name. By the next morning, a short video clip had begun to circulate inside the company's internal channels. It showed Vanessa Hartwell laughing at George Whitmore's coat. It showed her telling Patrick Carter that he had a small daughter sitting right over there. It showed her ordering security to remove an elderly man whose envelope contained the only document capable of freezing her largest deal. The clip did not stay inside the company. By that afternoon, a regional financial news outlet had a story under the headline that Hartwell Meridian Group's chief executive had publicly belittled the legal heir of a senior housing covenant. The image that ran above the article was not flattering. It showed Vanessa Hartwell mid-laugh, in a black dress, beside an old man with a soaked coat and a worn envelope. The board of Hartwell Meridian met that evening. Their concern was not only the public embarrassment, which would pass. Their concern was the underlying pattern. A junior member of the legal department, encouraged to speak frankly under the protection of board privilege, confirmed that the strategic planning team had marked the original covenant as low enforcement probability and had passed the matter forward. The 3 letters George Whitmore had written had reached the executive office. Each had been tagged low priority by an aide who had been told the property would close before any complaint could mature. No one accused Vanessa Hartwell of tearing up the letters. The board's complaint was harsher. She had built a culture in which warnings about ethics and law were treated as inconvenient noise whenever they slowed a transaction. That night, the board voted to suspend Vanessa Hartwell from the office of chief executive, pending an independent review. They appointed an interim leader to negotiate honestly with George Whitmore, with the residents of Whitmore Haven, and with an outside trustee. The decision was not made loudly. It was made the way serious institutions make serious decisions, in a quiet room, by people who knew that any failure to act would cost them more than the failure itself. Vanessa was not made poor. Her family name remained. Her future was not destroyed. But she lost the deal, she lost the title, and she lost something more difficult to replace, which was the assumption made by people who had worked under her that she was the one in the room with the clearest judgment. In a private office that no longer belonged to her, late that night, Vanessa Hartwell stood at the glass and looked down into the empty lobby. The marble was clean. The screens were dark. The bench where a small child had clutched a stuffed rabbit was empty. For the first time in a long career of being the most certain person in any room, she understood that her power had not made her larger. It had only made her mistakes larger. For Patrick Carter, the next morning carried a quieter fear. He sat at the small table in his apartment with a stack of bills and a calculator. Zoe was asleep on the couch, still in her school clothes. He counted what he had. He counted what he owed. He counted the weeks he could last if his job ended that Friday. He was not regretting what he had done. He was simply being honest about what it might cost. When Zoe woke, she came and stood beside his chair and put her chin against his arm. "Are you sad, Daddy?" "I am tired," he said. "Do you wish you did not help him?" He set the pen down. He thought about how to give her the truthful answer, because he believed she would remember it. "I was scared," he said. "But I do not wish I did not help him." She nodded as if that made sense to her. She did not try to make him feel better with a child's small lie. She only stayed beside his arm until he picked up the pen again. Patrick was called into a conference room the next afternoon. He went in expecting to be dismissed. He had brought his identification card, the keys to the supply closet, and his small folded uniform jacket. He set them carefully on the chair beside him. Inside the room sat a member of the board, a representative from Human Resources, and George Whitmore. George spoke first. He spoke slowly, because at his age he had learned that important sentences should be said slowly enough that no one could mishear them. He said that Patrick had stepped forward in a moment when stepping forward had no possible reward. Patrick had not known there was a covenant. Patrick had not known there was a trust. Patrick had not known there was a clause that could freeze a closing. Patrick had only known that an old man in a worn coat was being pushed out of a room, and that his own daughter was watching to see what her father did. "If this company punishes the one man who did the right thing," George said quietly, "then you do not need to investigate the culture. The answer is already in front of you." The board member exhaled. The decision came that afternoon. Patrick Carter was not dismissed. His employment was preserved, and his role was changed. He was offered a position in the Operations Management Division that oversaw community housing assets, a unit that the company had quietly neglected for years. The role required exactly the kind of knowledge he had built across 9 years of walking through the building's lower floors. It paid more than his old job. It came with a stable schedule. It came with an after-school care stipend for his daughter. Patrick listened. He did not celebrate. When the board member finished, He simply said, "I did not do this to be promoted." George answered, gently, "I know. That is why you deserve it." Patrick took the position. That afternoon, Zoe came to visit her father's new office for the first time. It was small. The window looked out at a brick wall. There was a single potted plant a coworker had brought in as a welcome. There was Patrick's name on the small plate beside the door. Zoe traced the letters with her finger, mouthing them carefully. "Daddy," she said, "you still fix things, right?" "I still fix things," he said. "But now, everyone knows you are a good man." He smiled, very small. "A good man does not need anyone to know," he said before he does the right thing. She nodded as if storing it. Several weeks later, the board of Hartwell Meridian Group held a closed meeting to announce a new plan for Whitmore Haven. The luxury conversion was canceled. The buildings would be honored according to the original covenant. The properties would be repaired. The residents would not be moved. An independent trustee, agreed upon by George Whitmore and the interim chief executive, would have oversight of the residence policy going forward. The financial return on the holding would be smaller than the projection that had once made Vanessa Hartwell's pulse quicken. The company would survive that smaller number. It would not have survived the lawsuit, the regulatory scrutiny, and the loss of public trust that would have followed the original plan. Vanessa Hartwell was permitted to attend the meeting. She did not sit at the head of the long table. She sat to the side, the way a person sits who is waiting to learn what her future will look like. After the meeting, she found George Whitmore in the corridor. She apologized. She used careful, simple words. She did not try to charm him. She did not try to explain. George listened without interrupting. When she had finished, he was quiet for a moment. "What hurt me," he said, "was not that you laughed at me. I am an old man. I have heard worse. What hurt me is that you stand for a company that was built to protect people who do not have anyone left to protect them. And when you looked at a man like me, you saw a problem." She did not answer. There was nothing to answer. She turned and walked toward the elevator and found Patrick and Zoe standing near the doors. Zoe shifted slightly behind her father's leg. She had not forgotten that the woman in the black dress had once tried to take her father's job. Vanessa stopped at a respectful distance. She told Patrick quietly that she had been wrong to use his daughter and his work against him in the lobby. She told him that he had done, in front of a room full of powerful people, what none of them had done. Patrick listened. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to win anything else. He said only, "Respect should not begin after you learn that someone has power." Vanessa did not argue. She lowered her eyes once and then she nodded. The way a person nods when she finally hears a sentence she has needed to hear. The elevator doors opened. Patrick held them. Zoe clutched her rabbit and held her father's hand. Outside the building, the snow had stopped. The afternoon was cold and bright. Patrick lifted Zoe onto a low wall while they waited for the bus. Behind them, the glass tower of Hartwell Meridian Group rose toward a sky that did not particularly care who owned which floors. Zoe was quiet for a long minute. Then she asked the question she had been holding. "Daddy," she said, "what if Mr. Whitmore did not have important papers? Would you still have helped him?" Patrick looked at his daughter for a long moment. The wind moved her hair. The rabbit's ears were soft against her chin. "Yes," he said. "Because before a person has a name on a document, they already have a name in this life." She thought about it the way 6-year-olds think about important things, with her whole small face. "That is a good rule," she said finally. "It is the only rule, sometimes." The bus came. He lifted her down. They walked together across the salted sidewalk, a father and his daughter, away from a tower that had learned, briefly and at great cost, that the dignity of a quiet old man in a worn coat was worth more than the largest deal of a young executive's career. And in a quiet office above them, lights began to switch off one by one, the way they always did at the end of an ordinary day, in an ordinary building, in an ordinary city, that on this one morning had been reminded that the worth of a human being is not measured by what they wear, what they carry, or whose attention they have earned, but by the simple, stubborn fact that they are here, and that the kind among us are the ones who remember that first.